Before we talk about this, let's hydrate. Hello, everyone. This is Bront CatHerder, and we're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends. And I've been putting up some polls recently. You guys have told me that Hydra is a big pain point for a lot of you. A lot of you are looking for access of early account teams. A lot of you were looking for Hydra Basics. And overall decided I'm going to tackle some of the basics first. So this is going to be a video about the Hydra, what the Hydra does, and a little bit of how you can counter the Hydra, but we're going to get a little more into team comps in a different video, because otherwise this video is going to be 3 hours long, and nobody wants that really. We're going to hop into the Hydra basics here. I'm going to be kind of as succinct as possible while covering things as in-depth as I can. But first, let's take a quick look, because you guys sponsor me, so let's go take a look at our sponsor. I just want to take the time to remind you guys that this stuff is all brought to you by you. Your support helps me keep these hot tubs going. Your support helps me make these videos, and your support keeps me moving. You know, if you want to, you can actually get some of my merch. I have these wonderful water bottles available in the merch. Camelback, actually really nice. I've got these wonderful, comfortable shirts. There's stickers available. You can check out my merch down below in the link. A very small portion of that goes to me. The rest of it is pretty much passed on to you guys at a reasonable cost. They're actually very nice, high-quality shirts. I've watched this one several times, haven't had an issue with it. I've gotten good feedback from several other people as well. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine. Smash that subscribe button, hit that like button, go to my Twitch, go follow my Twitch. All that stuff is stuff you can do for free that helps support me and helps me bring more content to you guys, helps me grow the channel, and just shows me some of the love that I want to show back to you guys. So thanks again. Let's get back to the video. So there's a couple things with Hydra Basics. Hydra is the only area in the game where you get to use 6 champions. You might think that would make the teams easy to build, but it's not, because there's an awful lot of things you need to cover in Hydra to make sure that you have everything you need to counter whatever heads you're working on. Now, Hydra is a weekly key. It's technically a clan boss, so in addition to the damage you do, the rest of your clan can actually help you take the Hydra down. You get 3 keys per week, and they reset Wednesday morning for me in the US, possibly Tuesday night for some people in Europe or in other countries as well. So when the reset happens can definitely be a little different depending on what region you're in. And each Hydra, there's a couple different rotations. I believe there's 6 different rotations. Each rotation has 4 base heads, 2 reserve heads, and then there's a fixed affinity for each head. General, the affinity is always no more than 3 of any one particular type of affinity, and there's at least 1 of every type of affinity. So there's never going to be a case where it's going to be all magic and all spirit. It does, however, mean that you may have to adjust your champions a little bit. It really depends on your team comp and your team builds for Hydra. Overall, there's a lot of really good rewards in Hydra. Hydra has stone skin and protection gear, which is some of the best gear in the game. You get clan gold, which is a great currency. You can use that to buy fragments of champions. You can use that to buy legendary book. You can use that to buy revenge accessories, which are great. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can buy. Clan gold is a great resource, and it helps a lot to be in there. Soul stones are great. Souls are very important to the game, so it gives you some of the small soul stones. So this is one of the places you can farm for souls. Clan XP, so help level up your clan a little bit. That mostly just unlocks the clan shop. Not a huge difference, but for early accounts and early clans, that can make a big deal because you can unlock higher levels. And then finally, Mithrala Lifebane fragments while you're doing it. Until you get Mithrala, you can get Mithrala fragments. Once you get Mithrala, no more fragments. Each Hydra head has these same passives. There's one minor difference, and I'll note that when I get to it. Damage that do max HP is capped at 10% of the head's max HP. This is the normal boss max HP hit. This does mean, however, that the tankier heads, the heads that have more HP, are better to hit with max HP hits. So we'll get to those when we talk about them as well. Damage for 1 tick of HP burn cannot exceed 20k HP, pretty standard. It's 20k HP per burn is still very, very good because that's on all 4 of them. So each burn tick is 80k HP. that can be a lot of damage, particularly on the lower levels. Damage from Reflect Damage, the War Mastery or Giant Slayer Mastery cannot exceed 50k per attack. Worth noting, but this is a pretty standard boss ability as well, at least for clan bosses. It does, however, mean War Master and Giant Slayer are still very good. It puts Giant Slayer as a much better place than it usually is versus War Master, so you certainly want to consider how many hits you have with the Giant Slayer versus War Master. Reflect Damage is talking about things like Geo or things like Brogni as well, as well as the Reflect Damage buff, although that's really not that exciting. The heads are immune to your standard CC abilities, other than the fact that one of the heads is not immune to Provoke, and that's very important because it's the only way to control that head. And then finally, they are immune to HP exchange effects, HP balance effects, cooldown increasing effects, and turn meter reduction effects. They are not, however, immune to some of the turn meter decrease effects of some of the blessings, specifically the temporal chains, which slows down their turn meter gain just a little bit, actually does affect the heads. But that's more of a decreased speed effect than it is a turn meter reduction effect. So one of the unique mechanics of Hydra is the Decapitation and Digestion. So instead of dying, heads are decapitated. So when they get to 0 HP, they will become decapitated heads. They actually have a different little icon for them, and the decapitated heads won't do anything other than sit around for 2 turns. When you hit a decapitated head, it takes 200% additional damage. This is including things like burns. This is including other stuff as well. It does still max out for the 20k. It does still max out for the 10% max HP. The HP of that head is technically the head that you decapitated, so keep that in mind if you're hitting a max HP head on a decapitated head. If you have damage that then spreads once it hits one target, decapitated heads are how you do the extra crazy damage. That's how Trunda works. You hit one of the decapitated heads with Trunda's special ability. She takes that damage and then crits again and does millions of damage across all the heads because she's doing 200% additional damage and then just multiplying again. Well worth hitting a decapitated head when you can for damage. Sometimes you actually don't want to, though, because you want to get effects out as well. Decapitated heads regrow after they take their second turn. So when a head is decapitated, it still keeps its turn meter. It will then take a turn and then take a second turn. And when it takes a second turn, it will then respawn. Whether it respawns into the same head it was before or whether it respawns into a new head is very dependent on what difficulty you're on. I believe on normal, it is an 80% chance to spawn to the same head. It goes down to under 50% when you're on Brutal and when you're on Nightmare. I don't have the exact numbers because I was unable to find them, so I didn't want to speculate exactly. I do recall it was 80%, 20% with normal, however. When the new heads spawn, they spawn with this Serpent's Will. This reduces all damage, and I do mean all damage, by 75% for the first turn. Now, some things like HP burn will probably still do the 20k. Max HP hits will not max out unless you have ridiculous modifiers on them. Doesn't mean you should never hit a head with Serpent's Will. It just means that you're not doing as much damage when one has Serpent's Will versus one that does not. So if you're looking to do maximum damage, you want to probably aim away from the Serpent's Will heads unless you're trying to land a specific debuff. Looking at the middle section, we've got the indication for champ that is marked for devouring. This is the next food champ, effectively, for the Hydra. The Hydra will eat this champ when they count down to 0 on the debuff. The first champion that marked is always the one of the highest crit damage. So basically your big damage dealer most of the time is going to be the one targeted for this. You can actually play around with this and control where this is going if you're careful. Do keep in mind you have to figure out how to free this champion when you lose your big damage dealer. So ideally you kind of want 2 damage dealers or some other ways to do damage beyond just a huge crit damage dealer. The debuff ticks down 1 turn per Hydra head turn, not per every turn. So if your champions are going again and again and again and the Hydra is not taking turns, you get a lot of extra space between devouring. That's why things like decreased speed are important. That's why turn meter boosting is important as well. Once a champion is devoured or the champion dies, a new champion is marked at random. So you will have somebody that is being devoured and being digested, and then you will have somebody else that gets marked as well at the same time. Towards the end of the Hydra run, this can lead to multiple champs being digested at the same time, which is how a run generally tends to end if you're going very, very long into it. Each new champion marked has the countdown reduced. So it starts off, I believe, around 15 turns. Don't quote me exactly on that. The next person to get devoured, it goes down to 14. Next person, it's down to 13. Next person, it's down to 12. So it continues to decrease and accelerate as the Hydra goes on, speeding up how quickly your champions are devoured and eventually how fast they're devoured, which we'll get into. When they're being devoured, there will be this digestion marker that's indicated in the bottom section. This digestion buff, debuff kind of thing shows up and works like a shield. So the Hydra will have a green extension on their health bar that works very much like a shield. In fact, it works in every way like a shield, other than it counts only for this particular digestion. You have to drop that to 0 to expel the champion and get them out. If you manage to do it before the turn indicator ends on the digestion, then it will spit them out. If you cannot do it in time, that champion becomes digested, they're gone, cannot be revived, there's no way to bring them back. Now, they're obviously still on your account, you don't lose them from your account, that'd be kind of gross. They're gone from that particular run. Sometimes you can survive that for quite a while, sometimes that's the end of your run because the rest of it falls apart because that was a key champion on your team. The first digestion has a 5-turn counter. This eventually drops to 2 turns. You do want to pay attention because there's one of the heads will take an extra turn. You can lose an extra turn if one of the heads takes the double turn, and that can be problematic, especially when it drops to 2 turns, because then you only have 1 turn to actually free the champion. So do pay attention to which head ate the champion as much as anything else. So let's get into the individual heads, what they do, and some of the basic counters for them. Head of Torment is also known as the Fear Head. This is the one that does fear and true fear on your champions. His A1 attacks and has a chance of playing a standard fear debuff that cannot be blocked or resisted. And he'll attack all enemies under fear or true fear after the very first attack. So he starts attacking more and more champions if you have a lot of extra fear out there. He has an AoE attack that does additional damage. Nothing super exciting on that AoE. And then finally, he has a passive. Enemies that are not under perfect veil buffs get true fear placed on them when they attack him. So you have to be careful when doing AoE attacks because you can start getting true fear on you, and that can disrupt your teams because you can fail to get things off. That cannot be blocked, much like anything else. So a block debuffs does not cleanse that from you or keep it off of you. He also decreases damage taken from poison by 90%. That sounds bad, but that actually means this head can be poisoned and can take damage from poison. So poisons are actually useful against this head. He also decreases damage from all Hydra heads take from AoE attacks by 10%. So that's worth noting. A lot of the Hydra heads have that, so AoE damage tends to get reduced just a little bit. And if you decapitate him, he removes all your fear and true fear debuffs from all enemies and get a perfect veil for 2 turns, which can be very powerful because perfect veil can reduce the damage you're taking. How do you counter the Torment head? Passive cleansers can help. So champions like Doom Priest or Tuhanarok can automatically, when they take a turn, cleanse a debuff or 2 off of everybody on your team. That is one way to deal with it, although if you get too many debuffs, you don't always get the right one. Veil and Perfect Veil champions certainly help with this as well. Anything from your Duchesses to your Rector Drast to your Taturas. There's some Perfect Veil champions out there. There's not a lot of epics that do it. Rector Drast is probably the easiest and most accessible champion that does it. And then finally, Shamail is very powerful because Shamail makes everyone just flat out immune to fear. Some champions are also immune to fear naturally for other reasons as well. So keep that in mind when you're dealing with the Torment head. The head of Decay is the cleansing head. So the cleansing head can place heal reduction when he attacks. He can remove all debuffs from all heads and then fill their turn meters of all heads by 30%. And that's really the most dangerous thing he can do because debuffs are the lifeblood of dealing with Hydra. And then finally, he has a ward that allows him to place a fairly huge shield that also cleanses the head that he does this to. And it's huge. It can get placed on somebody that's digesting someone and make it really hard to get through that digestion because you have to get through that life barrier first. The life barriered head is always the head with the lowest amount of total HP. So you can control it to some extent and you can have him target it. He will generally do the cleanse if there's at least 5 debuffs out there total on all the heads combined. If all of the debuffs are on a single head, he will instead do the life barrier. Or if there's only like 2 or 3 debuffs out there, he will do the life barrier instead of the decay. Why is this important? Because the way you control this head is with provoke. If you provoke the head, he will attack, and he'll attack under his normal A1, which means he's not necessarily going to attack the person that provoked him. He'll just attack somebody. But it means he attacks instead of doing his cleanse or instead of doing the shield. So sometimes you don't really care where the shield goes. So if you can't get in a provoke and you know you're not going to get a huge cleanse, maybe you let the shield happen and don't worry about the provoke. Overall, this is probably one of the more annoying heads. The provoke was something that was added more recently when they realized there really was no way to deal with this champion this head. When they realized there was no way to deal with this head other than just fighting through the cleanses, it made dealing with this really, really difficult early on. So being able to provoke is great. Provoke sets help a ton. Champions with A1 provokes can be great. Champions with AoE provokes that are consistent can be great. Champions that place provokes are amazing because they don't have to worry about weak hits. There's all kinds of strategies about how to provoke the Head of Decay, but provoke is the way to control Head of Decay. Beyond that, he grinds your max HP up a little bit when you heal. He can actually be poisoned, although he takes decreased damage, and he decreases the AoE damage. So, and if you actually kill him, you get some of your max HP damage restored, and you get a big heal. That's one of the reasons to actually kill some of these heads. You get some buffs out of them when you kill them. It is definitely worth looking at. I wouldn't necessarily prioritize a head based off of the buff I get for killing it. I would just try to kill the heads that are the most annoying or the ones that I can kill. The Blight head, aka the Poison head, spits out lots of poisons and places Poison Cloud. Poison Cloud forces you to weak hit. So as A3 puts out Poison Cloud, it's the first thing he tends to do. If a Hydra head is under Poison Cloud, you cannot hit it other than with a weak hit, unless your champion can not weak hit for some reason. To get around this, block buffs allows you to block Poison Cloud. Burns allow you to hit through Poison Cloud. So Hydra heads that are burning can be attacked through the Poison Cloud. So those are the two ways to deal with Poison Cloud. Generally, I prefer block buffs, but burn helps as well, and having both of them gives you options if you can't get block buffs out there as quickly as you'd like it to. He also throws out a ton of poisons, and you can actually insta-activate them in a couple cases, especially if he gets leech out as well. The best way to deal with the poisons is the best way to deal with any debuff. Cleanse them, block debuffs, or healing. He is one of the more annoying heads because if you cannot deal with the Poison Cloud, he can halt your run really quickly because basically the other heads are almost immune to anything you do for 2 turns if you don't have burn on them. So definitely bring your block buffs or your burns if possible when you're dealing with Hydra. The Head of Suffering, aka the tanky head. This is the head with the most HP and the most defense. He is really tough to kill. He has ways to basically soak damage, and he reduces the damage that everyone does on your team. So he is, honestly, for higher end Hydra, one of the more annoying heads to pop up. He can place Weaken on your champions, although he does not do it if you already have Strengthen. He has an Ally Protect and then a Reflect Damage, so he will protect the other heads, and then he will reflect damage you do back to yourself. So if you have a max HP hit that you would like to normally hit on the Head of Suffering, you want to avoid it because you'll kill yourself. Not particularly useful. This can be the bane of auto runs as well, because automatically the champions don't necessarily ignore this, so they'll go and attack the reflect damage and kill themselves. And then finally he has this pain link. Any damage that he takes also gets taken by one of your champions that has this pain link debuff. He then takes an extra turn when he places it. This is the head, because he's so tanky, he is difficult to get champions out of. Also, because of this extra turn, if he's digested somebody, there's a chance you may only have 1 turn to actually get them out, or 1 less turn at least, if his A3 is off cooldown. Because if his A3 is off cooldown, he will take that and immediately give himself an extra turn. So be very careful if he digests anything. Finally, he reduces AoE attacks by 30% instead of the normal 10%. So he reduces the damage that you do. This is why he's not particularly liked by a lot of the high-end Hydra teams, because if you have AoE damage, he reduces it. This is also why champions like Trunda, who do single target damage in an AoE, can be very helpful as well, and other champions that do similar damage in a similar style. He is susceptible to poisons, and poisons are actually one of the ways you can actually help take him down. Because he has a lot of extra max HP, he takes more damage from poisons than most of the other heads. even if it says it's a 90% reduction. The 90% reduction means it's not going to be a full 5%, it's going to be a 0.5% instead. That's still a lot of damage on the head of suffering. So poisons can be very helpful against him to one of the ways to chip him down. Other things to chip him down: block buffs for the reflect damage and ally protection. That can help prevent him from reducing your damage significantly. Champions that ignore defense. Obviously, decreased defense can be very helpful against him. Single target damage works very well against him or against other heads when he's around. Max HP hits are the most effective against him as long as you're getting through the defense. He has a much higher HP, so you do more damage for that max HP. And as I mentioned before, poison is definitely one of the other ways to get through and deal with countering him. The Head of Mischief is probably one of the most annoying heads overall. Not necessarily the most powerful, but definitely one of the most annoying and most disruptive. The Head of Mischief steals buffs, then spreads them to the rest of the team. And he also does test your turn meter, and he's hard to hit. So on his A1, he has a chance to steal buffs and steal turn meter. Not a chance, he'll actually do it. On his A2, if he has buffs, he'll spread them all, and they'll all have a 2-turn cooldown. So they will not have whatever cooldown he currently has. They will have a 2-turn cooldown. So it's possible for him to spread buffs and then they expire on him. And then he has a 75% chance of redirecting single target attacks against him to another head. So he is very difficult to hit if he's not under a hex. If he's under hex, you can now hit him. He'll also take hex spread damage, which is for damage that other champions are taking as well. Hex is a great debuff to keep him under control because otherwise he's very difficult to hit. If he eats somebody, it can be very difficult to free them from this head as well. Block buffs can be a great way to counter his ability to steal because he might actually steal the buffs, but he won't actually get the buffs because he's got block buffs. And then finally, one of the other things you'll hear are the term Mischief Tank. Mischief Tank is a high resistance champion who either has an extra buff that only that champion has, such as Wixwell's counterattack, for example, or Bivald has a strengthen he puts up under one of his abilities that he has and doesn't give to anybody else. Champions who have a buff that nobody else has can be the target of Mischief because Mischief will attack the enemy with the most buffs. However, Taunt also works against him, so he will attack the Taunt target as opposed to the enemy with the most buffs if Taunt is out there. So Taunt is another way to form a Mischief Tank. So your Mischief Tank is high enough resistance to resist the Head of Mischief, and then he has that extra buff as well. So mostly what will happen is Mischief will just hit that one champion who's hopefully also fairly tanky and not actually steal any buffs in the first place. So that's how a Mischief Tank works. And finally, we are on the Head of Wrath. This is the damage head. The Head of Wrath is probably the most dangerous head on a you're going to get nuked if you don't control him. How do you control him? Well, there's a couple different ways. He obviously does damage attacking all enemies. He's got a provoke because he wants to provoke you into attacking him. When you attack him, every hit places a vengeance counter on him. When that vengeance counter reaches 15, he gets the vengeance buff, a block debuffs buff, the reflect damage on that turn for 1 turn, and then he attacks all enemies. He also tries to put increased attack on himself as well. So how do you counter that? Block buffs will not block the vengeance buff, but it will block the block debuffs and the reflect damage and his increased attack. So that's a great way to keep some of that increased attack and extra damage off of him. Some indirect damage can certainly help you do damage to him without ticking that vengeance counter up. But if you get decreased attack on him and block buffs on him, you really do neuter his damage because it's very heavily on how much attack he has, which means you can almost ignore him at that point in time because he doesn't do as much damage. He still smacks pretty hard, and if you hit him enough times, he will smack pretty much immediately, so you have to be careful when you activate him. But if you're smart, you can actually sometimes use that to reflect a ton of extra damage. You can even use it to kill him. I've seen that happen a couple times. Otherwise, you can control when he's attacking versus when he's not attacking. Sometimes you know you've got to block buffs on him, so maybe you actually want to trigger him while that block buffs happens before he takes a turn. So there's a couple different ways you can work on controlling him. But overall, he does a ton of damage. Healing will definitely keep you alive as well. Block debuffs will help you against the provokes. Cleanse and resist for the provokes as well. Otherwise, there's a good chance he's going to blow up and vengeance you at some point in time. So do be careful. That's where the Head of Wrath works. So That is a big breakdown of all of the heads. I'm going to make this presentation available. I'm going to link it in the pinned comment down below, so do check that out. I've got my sources listed in there as well. I'll make this in a PDF format so you all can download that and take a look at this, and hopefully this will be helpful information. I want to thank Illumalove, Hell Hades, even Polarium for giving me some of this information. They made it easily available so I can compile it here for you guys. Hopefully this gives you a bit of a breakdown on ways that you can start countering some of the heads, what you can do against each of the heads, what you need to worry about with each of the heads. You know, it's a lot to take in, and this is why this is going to be a multi-part series. So we'll talk about team building in another video, but until next time, I'm Bront CatHerder.